Few minutes they can catch up. So good morning everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Insights event on problem gambling. My name is John Collins. I'm going to be chairing this morning's event. My day job is as Chief Executive of the Prisoners Education Trust, but I'm here today I think primarily because I'm a member of the Howard Leagues Commission on Crime and Problem Gambling. The commission was set up back in June 2019 to look at the links between problem gambling and crime and what can be done, I think, to more effectively prevent and respond to crime that is linked to problem gambling. It's been a real privilege to sit on the commission over the last couple of years, hearing from experts from the UK and around the world. I've certainly learned a huge amount about this important issue. My fellow commissioner, Andrew Nielsen, is going to talk about the findings to date in a few minutes. I'm not going to steal his thunder and try and preempt his presentation, but I certainly think it's been a really useful and informative process. Before we get onto the speeches, though, a couple of bits of housekeeping, and you'll see there's a slide up that gives you the information that I'm about to tell you. But firstly, I'd like to apologise for the problems with the link this morning that led to us having to send out a new one. You're all here, so you obviously found the new link, but I'm sorry for any inconvenience that was caused by that. It was entirely out of our hands. Secondly, and as you'll know from the message at the top of the screen, this event is being recorded and we will make a recording available to you all after the event. And just so you know, for those speakers who are using slides, we'll also send those slides out to you after the event, so you don't have to hastily scribble down everything that they include. Thirdly, and I'm sure that you're all used to this by now after 18 months or more of COVID, please do keep your microphones on mute when you aren't speaking to cut down on background noise. It would be great though if you could keep your camera on throughout the event, if you're comfortable doing that, so it feels more like a real event and less like speaking to a sea of blank screens. And it's great to be able to see quite a few of you on the screen now. One of the very few mild silver linings of the COVID crisis has been the move to more online events, meaning that people have been able to join us from all around the country this morning in a way that might not have been possible at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning for a face-to-face event. So welcome to you all and thank you very much for coming. Finally, on the housekeeping front, there'll be plenty of time for Q&A and discussion later. We're going to have all the presentations and then Q&A discussion at the end. So please do add any questions or comments that you have in the Teams chat function. And we'll see that Chris Holmes has already opened the chat function. A couple of you have said good morning. If you've got questions, comments, things you'd like to add, please do add them to the chat function. When we get to the Q&A later, if possible, we would like you to ask your questions yourself. So if you don't want to do that or that isn't possible, please do let us know in the chat. But otherwise, time and technology allowing, we'll bring you in to ask your own question. And we know that some of you may as well as have questions, have contributions to make about your own experience and your own work in this area. And we're really looking forward to hearing that. Now, though, it's time to move on to our speakers before we get to the Q&A. We have a range of really interesting speakers this morning with lots of experience in this area. We've got a lot to fit in with multiple speakers in quite a short period of time, so we've asked them to keep their contributions fairly brief. But as I've said already, there's time for Q&A at the end once all the speakers have been. So if you want to know more, you can ask. I don't think I've got anything else to add at this point. So the first speaker this morning is George Barrow from the Ministry of Justice. Over to you, George. You're on mute, I think, George.
Okay.
I'm not to get one of them in early.
It is good to do that. Part of the ritual humiliation. So what I wanted to do was just to give a little bit of context about this as to where this issue fits in with the Ministry of Justice and why we've come to it. I sit in a policy area of the Ministry of Justice called Vulnerable Offenders, and we look at cohorts of offenders, and we create that then translates into operational policy, which is implemented by HMPPS. But our role is to look at a more things at a more strategic level and do horizon scanning around issues that may be coming up as growing problems. So the letter that we had about 12 months ago from Lord Goldsmith asking for a meeting on gambling with senior people at the Ministry of Justice and HMPPS was really a bit of an alert to the fact that we hadn't looked at gambling in any systematic way. And the Howard Leagues Commission was something that we were aware of, but we hadn't really engaged with. We didn't have a specific policy response or a position on gambling as it relates to, or problem gambling rather, as it relates to the criminal justice system. But we were acutely aware that the issue was relevant and was worth looking at in much greater detail. So what we did with the invitation to meet Lord Goldsmith is we declined that, and we said to Lord Goldsmith, we'd like to do a bit of work on our side before we go ahead with that. And I made the links to Howard League, and we created a bit of a working group on this side with colleagues in HMPPS and other places. And the question was, how do we look at this issue a bit more logically? And I think some of these things will come out in the discussion today. We need to raise awareness. We need to understand how we assess people. We need to know what good practice looks like, who provides that practice, who provides that support, and how we marshal that capacity. None of which I think we completely understand around gambling, but some of which is becoming much clearer following the discussions we've had and the work of the Commission. Obviously, problem gambling is quite a political issue, but we're looking at it from the point of view of what is best practice and good practice. That's our major concern. And we want to kind of translate our policy thinking into something that will work operationally. So we've got quite a lot of work underway, and you'll hear more about that. Where does that, now that's going, where does that leave me as the policy person? Well, I think there are probably links to other departments and other services that we would probably lead on. There may be questions around legislation or changes in rules which would come to my area. And I think the important part here is we're building a much clearer picture as to where problem gambling fits in a wider social policy response. So we're grateful to the Howard League for bringing it to us. We know that there's a lot of expertise and insights and experience out there which we're not really capitalising on, and I think this event is one of the first ones to do that. And we're really interested in hearing the discussion today and hearing a little bit more about the Howard League's Commission findings. And with that, I'll hand over to Andrew.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, George. And as George has said, our next speaker is Andrew Neilson. As I already mentioned, Andrew is a fellow commissioner with me on the Howard League's Commission on Crime and Problem Gambling, and is also Director of Campaigns at the Howard League. Andrew.
Hello, can people see my screen? Because I'm sharing slides.
Yes, that works.
Great. Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrew Neilson. I'm Director of Campaigns at the Howard League, and I'm a member of the Commission on Crime and Problem Gambling. And I'm here today to give you a readout on the state of play of the Commission's work and provide some policy context for why the Ministry of Justice is holding this very welcome event. So just a few words first about the Howard League, which set up and is supporting the work of the Commission. I'm sure most people in the audience are aware of us, so I will not dwell on what we do. Just as a point of curio, the statue there in the slide is one of John Howard, who was commonly thought of as the first prison reformer. We were set up by admirers of Howard in 1866. We're a charity independent of government. We campaign for less crime, safer communities, fewer people in prison. We have United Nations and Council of Europe consultative status, and we're also a membership organisation. If you're not a Howard League member, please think of or consider joining us. So onto the Commission. The Commission was launched in 2019, as John said at the beginning, and is scheduled to run until the end of 2022. The chair of the Commission, pictured on the slide there, is Lord Peter Goldsmith QC, a former Attorney General. He leads a team of commissioners comprising of academics and professionals with expertise in the criminal justice system and in public health, as well as experts with knowledge of the gambling industry and with lived experience of addiction. And the Commission's brief is to answer the three questions there on the slide. What are the links between problem gambling and crime? What impact do these links have on communities and society? And what should be done? One of the key ways that we're seeking to answer these questions is through academic research. So the Commission published a review last year which assessed the academic literature covering jurisdictions such as Australasia, the United States, Canada, Germany, Scandinavia, and of course the UK. And the review found that while millions of people are affected by gambling either directly or indirectly, there appear to be fewer than 50 peer-reviewed papers in the last 24 years that address the links between problem gambling and crime. If the overall quantity of the research wasn't huge, there was nonetheless a consistency of findings across all jurisdictions. So research analysis suggested that there is a high incidence of people committing crime to fund their gambling. A wide variety of crimes are committed as a result of gambling addiction, not just white-collar crimes such as theft and fraud, but also offences that occur in public spaces such as street robbery. There is significant evidence of domestic abuse and child neglect linked to some problematic gambling behaviour. Studies indicate that the more complex, prolonged and persistent a gambling problem is, the more likely it is that a crime will be committed, and indeed that many crimes may result. Nevertheless, there are huge gaps in our knowledge from the academic literature. And we've been approaching these gaps in the research by starting 4 projects as part of the Commission's work, commissioning projects. So one on the sentencers' understanding and treatment of problem gambling has just been published. The second on lived experience should be published before the end of this year. And we're also starting 2 further projects listed on the slide there, one looking at women and their experiences and the other on Black, Asian and minority ethnic communities. Both of these groups are particularly under-researched and under-reported on as regards gambling harms and crime. So the Commission has also published its first policy report, and the publication pictured on this slide is titled, appropriately enough, State of Play, and it summarises the evidence that's been uncovered by the Commission so far, including the findings from the research with sentencers that I've just mentioned. This briefing makes some initial recommendations to government and to policymakers. As well as the research I've outlined, the Commission has been holding it held a call for written evidence, and it has held a series, and is continuing to hold, a series of oral evidence sessions with witnesses from a wide range of backgrounds. We've heard from the Gambling Commission, charities working to reduce gambling harms, gambling operators, the Gambling Related Harm All-Party Parliamentary Group, witnesses with lived experiences of problem gambling and crime, and criminal justice professionals. Before I explain the key points of our findings, I just wanted to highlight this quote from the evidence we received. The impact on society of people committing crimes to fund their gambling is far-reaching. Stealing to support gambling is a key public concern and is a serious consequence of gambling more than people can afford to lose. The potential of harm to individuals, businesses and society is real. And the quote goes on to say, it was too big for the slide, family members and friends who become victims of gambling-associated fraud or theft may experience financial problems as well as mental health issues and damaged relationships, including family breakdown. Organisations defrauded of money may suffer financial difficulties, leading in some cases to job losses and bankruptcies, impacting on the wider economy. Now, that is evidence from the Gambling Commission itself, which regulates the industry. Indeed, gambling-related crime is recognised within the Commission's national strategy to reduce gambling harms. So I think that it's clearly recognised by those who are regulating gambling that crime is an issue that needs to be addressed. So what are our key findings? The first 3 points here are absolutely vital, and I think they underline why today's event is so important. Problem gambling leads to crime, as it is an escalating addiction which requires escalating funds. There is a lack of knowledge or targeted activity within the criminal justice system as regards crime related to problem gambling. And despite problem gambling being a recognised mental health disorder, the criminal justice system is not responding to related offending in an appropriate way. And that third point is clear from the research with sentencers that we've just published. Problem gambling is not considered to be a mitigating factor in sentencing in the way that mental health problems or drug and alcohol addiction are. And following on from that, the fourth point on this slide, the confiscation of assets under the Proceeds of Crime Act needs to be reviewed, is a point that is a strong theme of the evidence that we received from those with lived experience. Indeed, it is a recurring issue in the lived experience research that we hope to be publishing soon. The Proceeds of Crime Act, or POCA, is legislation designed really with drug dealers in mind to confiscate their ill-gotten gains. Problem gamblers who steal from them, say from their employers, for example, are not making any money from that crime. They are losing the money or ploughing any winnings straight back into gambling. And pursuing them after being sentenced, or more often than not pursuing their loved ones, is really inappropriate, and it is causing real problems as people try to rebuild their lives. And I understand this recommendation may be less directly relevant to practitioners here today, but it is something that we will be looking at going forward, as it may require revisiting this legislation. We have some further recommendations. There is a danger that responses to problem gambling and crime can lead to what we call up-tariffing, where a more severe punishment is handed down by the courts. For example, by replacing fines with community orders and treatment requirements. We don't advocate for creating whole new ways of punishing people who commit crime through problem gambling. The emphasis that we are putting on things is really on diversion from the criminal justice system and into treatment and support wherever possible. There are examples of good practice that we highlight in our briefing. Cheshire Police have done very interesting work on screening for gambling harms in police custody in partnership with a charity called the Beacon Counselling Trust. And we feature that work in this publication. The charity GamCare have done interesting work in Hertfordshire prior to COVID, and we highlight that too. And I know we will be hearing about new work being done with London Probation and GamCare later this morning. And our key recommendation to the Ministry of Justice and the Prison and Probation Service is on this slide, that as a first step, the Ministry of Justice should review what improvements can be made, including awareness raising and training among practitioners, the assessment of individuals in the system, and improving specialist services. And we're at a moment, I think, of opportunity for this to happen, because it does mean identifying the availability of services locally and signposting individuals to those services. The probation service has been reunified within the public sector, and there is an opportunity to expand good practice into the new probation model as it is being developed. And there may be further opportunities to encourage police and crime commissioners to help fund work locally. And I'm actually speaking to the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners about this next month. And we think the Ministry of Justice can take relatively small but important steps, which will not only improve practice, but help to build a picture on the prevalence of crime related to problem gambling. And today's event and the materials being launched today are very much part of that. Finally, our research with sentencers, magistrates primarily, shows that there is a need for guidance to the courts on problem gambling and crime. We think the Sentencing Council has a role to help produce that guidance and support sentencers in their decision making. Finally, what next? Well, the Commission is running for another year until the end of 2022. We do have more research to publish, and we will be doing that over the coming months, as I've mentioned. And I suppose, can we flesh out the answers to those three questions that the Commission was set up to answer? What are the links between problem gambling and crime? What impact do those links have on communities and society? And what should be done? And I think that third question is clearly particularly important. I've outlined some ways in which the criminal justice system can better respond to crime related to gambling harms, but lasting solutions lie outside of the system in a properly funded public health approach. What might that look like? To add a fourth question, what lessons might other jurisdictions around the world hold for us? The Commission continues to take oral evidence from experts, and we intend to make further policy recommendations in due course. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Andrew. That was really interesting and a good summary of the work that the Commission's been doing, which, as I said at the start, has been a really interesting insight into an issue which I think has not had the attention it's deserved in the criminal justice system until now, and it's been good to get a proper opportunity to look into it in detail. Our next speaker, to keep moving on, is Steve Ramsey, who is Programme Support Mentor at the new charity Epic Restart Foundation. Steve, over to you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Ramsey, and I do work for Epic Restart Foundation, a newly set up charitable foundation, which is primarily to support those people who have suffered gambling harm. I myself had a gambling problem for quite a long time. And I've suffered firsthand the effects of that addiction, and it led me to end up within the criminal justice system. So just looking at what Andrew spoke about and the recommendations. Andrew asked me to speak today because I provided previous lived experience evidence to his report. So really, I just wanted to sort of give an idea of what it actually means for someone with a gambling addiction. So I'm going to take you back to July 2017, and I found myself sat on a beach on the Lincolnshire coast, and I had one question on my mind, and that question was, I need to end my life. Can I do it? That's the position I was in, and that position came about because for the last 6 or 7 years, literally every penny that I got hold of, I was gambling, and it was just creating havoc in my life, and I didn't really know how to get out of it. Now, luckily on this day, I decided that I didn't want to end my life and I needed to do something about it. And I ended up informing my workplace that I'd been stealing from them. I went into work and was suspended. And work said to me, Steve, don't worry, we'll sort this out. That wasn't really what I wanted to hear. I needed to get this off my chest. So I left work and I presented myself to my local police station. And I just walked in and I said, look, I need to report a crime. And this crime is one I've been committing myself. And I just want to put it into a bit of perspective. I had a look at my information from gambling operators. In the previous month to this, I had placed 3,659 bets in a month. So that's 118 bets on average a day. I had staked £111,000 in that month. I'd lost 96. So that meant for that month I'd lost £14,265, which works out it's just under £500 a day. I couldn't sustain that. So I'd gone through all of my savings. I got loan after loan. I'd had up to 6 credit cards at one time. I ran out of options, and it meant with access to funds through my work, I ended up stealing. So this was all going through my head on the day I presented myself to the police station. And if I'm totally honest, they just weren't really sure what to do with me at first. I spent over 6 hours in the police station. I refused all legal help. I just needed it off my chest. I think the first 2 hours I had to persuade the police officers that I wasn't covering up something bigger, that I hadn't gone in there to cover for someone else. Because I guess not many people walk in and say, you know, I've done this. But I think what it shows is just what complete mess I was in mentally. If I'd walked into the police station full of drink or on substances, you know, they would have just said, you know, we'll come back to you in 5 or 6 hours time. I then spent 4 hours pouring my heart out, saying this is what I'd been doing, how long it had been going on for. I had no idea of the totals involved. It turned out it was £192,000 that I'd stolen from work. But this is on top of over £500,000 that I had staked and lost prior to stealing. And the amounts progressed month on month throughout this time. But it was the first time I'd actually uttered the words to anybody that I had a gambling problem. And after that, it was very cordial. I signed the statements and I was released on bail, and I didn't see a police officer again. There was no signposting for me to get help. So I just left there. I then had to tell all my family and friends, and then had to get a solicitor and look forward to my day in court. Now, it took about 7 months before I got to court, and I was sentenced to 27 months. It could have been more than that, in a position of trust, but it was a first offence. I had handed myself in. I had some great references. So 27 months was a sentence I was happy with. And then, of course, off I went to prison. On my second day, I was screened with, I was asked if I had drug issues or alcohol issues or mental health issues. And I said no, because I didn't think I had. I then never spoke about gambling to anybody until July. So I was sentenced in February, and it wasn't until July before gambling was spoken about. So I was just left to my own devices to just keep my head down and get on with my sentence. In the meantime, I could see the drug and alcohol teams working with people every day. Those that were inside with violence had anger management courses. You know, there was so much for other people to take part in to try and help them. But it wasn't until July, as I moved through Category D prison, that I talked about gambling. And the question was, what can we do? And the answer was pretty much nothing, really. I fought in the end to get a license to go outside to attend a GA meeting. So the only real help I got was the license to go out to get help. So upon my release, then I had to go to probation. Probation at first was a weekly meeting that turned into a fortnightly and then a monthly meeting. And really the only support I was given was to get my tag curfew hours amended so I could attend a GA meeting. That was it, to be honest. Although I really enjoyed speaking with the people who I saw at probation, it was a tick box exercise. I needed help on how to talk about addiction, how to talk about going to jail because of fraud. I was in finance and accountancy for 30 years, and I had a fraud conviction. So what was I going to do for employment? These were the types of things I needed help with, but it just wasn't really available to me. So I fully understood the need for a sentence for the crime that I committed. Whether I received the support that I should have had is something I can firmly say I didn't. Luckily, I got through it all. There's so much gambling in prison. I didn't get involved because I was determined not to gamble. I'm going to sort of end a little bit with the poker side of things. Poker, I understand why poker was brought out. When it comes to gambling, for a lot of people, poker just actually, it creates further victims of crime. You have loved ones, partners, husbands, sons, daughters, who have to sell up their homes so that equity can be paid back to the victims of the theft or fraud or whatever crime it was. And people don't benefit from this. The Crime Prosecution Service, when they investigated my funds, concluded that 78% of every penny that went through my account over a period of 5 years ended up with a gambling operator. A gambling operator was subsequently fined for their failings with my account. They did repay back £79,000 to my employer. Other operators that did exactly the same weren't investigated and weren't fined and benefited from the proceeds of crime. So poker, it really needs to be looked at in these circumstances. And finally, I think I'd just like to sort of say, you know, I read again this week, a GP has been jailed for 3.5 years. He stole over £1 million to fund his gambling. So amongst all the headlines in the sensational headlines about a GP being jailed, it was quietly written that the operators had paid back £900,000. So there's more at play when it comes to this. The operators need to be looked at in their actions, because if I just end what I'll say is the police, when I first went to the station, spent a couple of hours to determine whether I was assisted in my crime, whether I was abetting someone in my crime. I was actually abetted in my crime by the operator. I held my hands up and took responsibility, but I think others need to do that as well. So I'll leave it there. Thank you for the time. I hope I didn't waffle too much, but thank you for listening.
Well, thank you very much, Steve, for what was an excellent presentation. And I think it shows just how far the justice system has to go in supporting people to address gambling addiction, and also why, with the sort of the bit near the end, why the Commission has picked up on the issue of POCA and whether it's being used appropriately. So thank you very much for your contribution, which I think everyone would agree was really helpful and insightful in terms of what that experience is like being within the system in the aftermath of a gambling addiction. So our next speaker is Heather Wright from the HMPPS Effective Practice and Service Improvement Group. I think I've got that acronym right. Just a reminder before Heather starts that if you do have any questions or comments or things you'd like to add to the Q&A discussion later, please do put them in the chat and we'll go through them and make sure people get a chance to ask them at the end. But in the meantime, over to Heather.
Thank you very much, John. Firstly, I'd just like to say thank you very much to Steve for sharing his lived experience. That's, you know, really insightful. When I woke up this morning, I thought, you know what, this is a hidden harm, and the way you spoke about your experience, it feels like it's sort of underground. And you know, when you said about sitting on the beach that day, and you know how you were feeling at the time, and the headline you've spoken to about the GP, that's actually in the south of England where I am. So, you know, this affects all communities, service users and potentially our colleagues as well. I think we forget sometimes, and as you've spoken, Steve, that there are professionals that are, you know, victims of the problematic gambling. And the impact on individuals, business and society is absolutely massive. But I'm really, really pleased to have been able to hear your experience today. So in preparing for this, I looked on the internet, as everyone does, and it struck me that in the most deprived parts of the country, there are the most gambling outlets. And that actually really feels quite shameful for me to see that. And thinking about my own experience, I remember working in well-known bookmakers in probably 1992. And that was before we had lots of gambling online, and seeing particularly men outside the betting shop with their partners, children in prams, waiting for them to come out with little. And those were the days when I think evening racing had just started. So, you know, not only did we have people losing their pay packets as they had in them days, but we had children out at night and partners, and probably in fairly deprived circumstances as well. So thinking about the links to potentially child neglect and harm hidden that children suffer because of this addiction really is quite stark. So we know that in the criminal justice system, research indicates that there's a correlation to prisoners and the link to gambling from both males and females. So this is going to be people that potentially use gambling as a form of escapism from somebody that's harming them, and actually makes them more vulnerable. So we know domestic abuse is a complex area of our work, and any further issues within relationships are going to compound on an already harmful situation. So as I said, victims might use gambling as an escapism, for example, but they may also become further victimised and at harm from a perpetrator of abuse because of their vulnerability around that. I've noticed since lockdown as well, and I don't know if others have, about television and advertising. So in the afternoons in particular, I think it's really come home to me that, you know, the advertisements kind of lend themselves to, this is a place where you're going to make friends. This is a place where if you join a certain bingo game, you're going to meet other people and you're going to have fun, and there's lots of colours on the screen and stuff like that. So if you're feeling isolated and lonely, this is kind of a really kind of welcoming space for people. And I think, you know, like I said, the lockdown, or in any case, people that are isolated and lonely, can get involved in this really. And, you know, this differs to a, you know, annual trip to the races up to Goodwood or wherever you might go. You know, this is a real, it's like you need to be fed, you need to keep doing this to kind of fund the addiction. And also, you know, as Steve was saying, we don't tend to attend to it, if you like we would with drugs and alcohol, because it feels a kind of accepted form of entertainment, and we actually know that it's not, in terms of if people go into the problem gambling state. So what is available for probation practitioners? We use an assessment of people when they come into the probation space, so people on probation, service users. And immediately the thought around this goes into the sort of finance section of that when we think about problem gambling. And it probably does, because there's a massive financial impact. But I think certainly in other sections of the system, you know, that we use to assess service users, thinking about the impact on mental health, the impact on relationships, the impact on children, as I spoke to earlier, is really, really important. And I think asking the screening question of somebody at the start of your interaction with them is really, really important. And I was sorry to hear that Steve told us that that hadn't happened for him. So it is really, really important that the whole picture is taken into account of why the offence occurred, what we can do to hopefully prevent it from happening in the future, but also to make sure that the right rehabilitative sentence plan is put in place. So Steve spoke about struggling to get a job, or what the prospects for a job would be, because his area of expertise is probably not going to be available to him because of the type of conviction. So we have a 7-minute briefing available to our practitioners, which is designed to be a fairly swift intervention in terms of what you might facilitate with your team, for example, as a team manager, to make sure that hopefully your practitioners do start asking these questions. And actually, when anybody comes onto the probation caseload, as it were, all of the paperwork from the CPS is there, so we should really be able to analyse why the offence occurred in the beginning, and especially from somebody like Steve, who shared with us the real candidness of why he ended up in custody. So the practitioner resource pack we have as well is a further step from that, and that helps practitioners undertake the assessment and look at the risk of harms that may be caused by problematic gambling. And as I said earlier, it feels very much for me like a hidden harm. Certainly events like this and the amount of people here today is massively welcome, and we have communicated through Probation News and other channels around problematic gambling. So I think that in terms of progress and how we might better provide practitioners with the skills and experience and knowledge actually that they need to have the conversation. And I think people come onto probation and have to tell their stories about a lot of things that they'd really probably rather not. And we look at people with a very strengths-based approach now. And what we like to do is look forward and to try and rehabilitate. But it's important, the first thing we need to be doing is ask the question, has gambling or the gambling of someone close to you had a negative effect on your life? And I think it's really, really important that we make it safe to ask those questions. We have a recording from today that will be shared and can be accessed by people who've not been able to attend. And certainly where I work in effective practice and service improvement, I will take forward steps to make sure that the material is promoted and that we develop the work we've already got to make sure this area is covered. I can see I've got a hand up, and I'm not sure whether or not we will do panel at the end.
And we're planning to do questions at the end, Heather, so maybe be carrying on for now.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. So Rita, I can see you've got a hand up, so if you can hold that thought and we'll come to that at the end. So as we move forward into the Unified Probation Service, we have what's called Commissioned Rehabilitative Services, so CRS. We like good acronyms in HMPPS. And so regional probation directors will actually be able to come out and commission services for different criminogenic factors, so needs that people on probation have. So I'll be really, really interested to hand over to colleagues from London and hear what their experience is of commissioning for problematic gambling in London. But thank you for your time today.
Brilliant, thank you very much, Heather. As you mentioned, our next two speakers are from London. So it's a joint presentation between Vicky Rapti from London Probation and Dominique Webb, who's Head of Programmes at the charity GamCare. I'm not sure quite how they're going to divide it between themselves, so over to you both.
Hello, good morning. Let me just share my screen for a second. So, hello, thanks for having me. My name is Vicky Rapti and I am one of the commissioning and partnerships managers currently working in the community integration unit in the London region of probation. I am here today to speak to you about a pilot we commissioned with GamCare, as we recognize that there is a need for a coordinated organizational response to the challenge posed by gambling. So this 12-month pilot is set to launch really soon in the end of November, and it will start with a series of GamCare-led online briefing for all of operational staff. It will start with briefings because it is very, very important that we raise awareness of harmful gambling behavior and the impact it has, not only on the people we work with, but also on the families and wider community. We have not had the opportunity in London to undertake specific training to promote problem gambling so far. Neither we know how to broach the issue with people on probation, so we are starting from there. Through these briefings and ongoing work with GamCare, we will increase our ability to also identify gambling harm amongst people on probation. As we have been saying throughout the day, first of all, the data does not isolate gambling-specific harms as they hide behind other various criminogenic needs. We've discussed about the connection of gambling with theft or fraud or financial and, of course, domestic abuse. But it's also notable that there is a link between what gamblers in treatment report as issues and that hugely overlap with large proportions of probation cohorts. For example, gamblers may report drinking problems. Substance misuse represents 40% of probation caseloads. So it is very important that we actually are able to screen and pick at the problem. Now, throughout our work with GamCare, we will also increase our knowledge of what kind of treatment options are available out there and what kind of support we can provide to the people, enabling us to help those who have identified gambling risk-related needs, but also maybe curb any potential risks that the people impacted by somebody's gambling-related need could face, including victims.
Vicky, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think
yes?
you mentioned that you were going to share slides, but we can't see them at the moment. So there are slides you wanted to share. We're not seeing them at the moment.
Oh, I am so sorry because I thought I was sharing the screen. It happened to me before. I'm terribly sorry. The slide is right here. It's only this. I'm really sorry. I did not realize I was not presenting, but it's only that. And I am now at the bottom of it, where I'm mentioning the fact that through this 12-month pilot and working together with GamCare, we will also manage to build an evidence base, which not only will inform how future service design will be, but also inform any commissioning intentions. Because as I was saying earlier, due to lack of data right now, we cannot really capture the scope or scale of the matter and also inform how a service will want to look like or commissioning intentions in this space. So that was a very brief whistle-stop tour from me about the 12-month pilot we're taking with GamCare. Apologies for the screen sharing issue. And without any further ado, I will pass over to Dominique Webb, who is here from GamCare to speak to us about the work the organisation does. They're involved with criminal justice and, of course, this 12-month pilot with the London region. Dominique, over to you.
Thanks, Vicky. Thanks everyone for the opportunity to come and speak to you today. I'm head of programmes at GamCare. We're one of the leading national providers of gambling harm treatment, education and training in Great Britain. You may well have heard of the National Gambling Treatment Service. And Vicky, I think you're still sharing your screen.
Oh, God almighty. Sorry.
That's okay. Yes, so you may have heard of the National Gambling Treatment Service. This is commissioned by a charity called GambleAware, and we're part of that. And what we do is we deliver the National Gambling Helpline, which runs 24 hours a day. And we're also responsible for delivering treatment, one-to-one and group treatment across England, Wales and Scotland. Some of that's provided by our in-house teams and some of it is contracted through local providers. More complex cases are then referred on to NHS-run clinics, Northern and London problem gambling clinics, and people with the most complex issues. The Gordon Moody is an organisation that runs residential clinics, and so that's the National Gambling Treatment Service as it stands at the moment. But we also have education and prevention programmes, one of which is a 2-year National Criminal Justice and Gambling Harms programme, which is what I'm talking about today. So with this, we work with agencies within the criminal justice system to deliver training to professionals, and this gives people the tools to recognise where there might be somebody having gambling issues, identify who they are, and to help support them into any kind of treatment and support they may need. And this applies to people that are both experiencing they're gambling themselves, but they also might be experiencing problems because they're gambling of somebody else around them. We also include input from lived experience because we think that will ensure that our services reflect the needs of people who've been through criminal justice system. And I think anyone who's listened to what Steve has said, we know how powerful that is, and being able to reflect back what you have received or what you haven't received is really vital in terms of us putting together really good services. Because as a number of speakers have said, you know, there are still real gaps in understanding of gambling prevalence, the experiences and challenges that people face, how it affects different groups of people differently, and also how it affects people within different settings across the criminal justice system, because they're always widely different if you're in custody than if you're in the community. So we are delivering these services, and we're going to use our experiences for facilitating thought leadership, which is rather a grand title, but really means that we're going to use what we learn, and we want to use that to drive and accelerate progress across gambling and criminal justice sector. So we really want the work that we're doing to pinpoint the needs of the service users in these particular groups, and to add to the body of evidence. Again, very small body of evidence, but it is increasing, and we see that this as a strategic programme, we want to add to that body of evidence, and in that way we can actually make services more effective and respond better to the needs of the people that we're trying to serve. So we're doing it through piloting new approaches with partnerships. We're working with probation, we're also working with police and some prisons. As a strategic project, we're piloting innovative approaches, and we're going to use that learning to sort of improve future treatment models. And we have commissioned, or we are commissioning independent evaluators, because we believe that's the best way of us being able to demonstrate what impact that the pilots are having beyond the life of the actual delivery. And we'll be sharing best practices and findings of that when we have them. So in terms of the partnership that we have with London Probation, we're going to be initially training around 850 staff through sort of 90-minute briefings, which will provide like a comprehensive coverage of the sort of understanding the nature of gambling, what the signs are, how to recognise when somebody might be experiencing gambling harms. We will also, over the 12-month period, see if there's a need for other resources that would be useful for staff, and we'll work within the current systems and approvals to try and see if we can respond to that. We feel that it's just really vital that we work within the systems. So if we're going to really improve the ability to pick up those people who are having the problems, we really don't want to introduce a new layer of bureaucracy. So we're really looking for opportunities where we can introduce screening through the existing systems and procedures. And we know it's a challenge, but we think that that's part of what's going to make it more successful. We're also developing direct referral routes. A lot of our referrals into treatment come via the helpline, but we're developing a direct referral so that probation staff can refer anybody that they pick up straight into London Treatment Service. And we'll be looking at, we hope that that will mean that we're going to be able to pick them up more quickly. We're much more likely to have a high success rate, high completion rate, if we can make that very streamlined and very efficient. We're going to be monitoring everything along the way, so we'll be monitoring the effectiveness of the training. We'll be looking at the kind of levels of referrals that we've got coming through, what the completion rates around treatment are, and because it's a pilot, we're really going to be looking at what works, but also, as importantly, what doesn't work. And I think that and, you know, we hope to be able to sort of report back on that, you know, when we complete it. But that brings me back really full circle to where we started, which is the importance of working in partnership with agencies in order to make it relevant, to make it effective, and to have more meaningful impact, so that we are working together to try and embed the practice and sustain the findings beyond the life of the project. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much indeed for that, both of you, for your contributions. We've got one more speaker to go, but I don't think he has been able to join us yet. He's dropping in for a short period on what is a very busy day for him. So while we're waiting for him to join us, we did have a question that came in via the chat from Kim Martin. And I think, Kim, you said you'd be happy to ask it yourself. So if you're there and available, we might as well get a question done now while we're waiting for the next speaker, Jamie Bennett, to join us. Kim, are you with us?
Yeah, I am. Hi, thank you. I just wanted to ask Steve a question, but before I do, I just wanted to say, Steve, thank you for sharing your story and how brave you are, you know, to not only put yourself in a position where you kind of surrendered yourself, but also to come on here and talk to everyone really genuinely about your experience. So thank you for doing that. And I think you've answered me in the chat, but I guess just for the wider group as well, I was just keen to get a bit of insight from you in terms of what we can look out for in prisons around gambling that is happening in the establishments, so we can look to signpost people to support if we can.
Yeah, thanks, Kim, for those words. I think the trouble with it is, in a way, is I mean, gambling is not allowed in prisons. So most people will tell you they don't do it. But it's also, I found it quite common, anything from sweepstakes when the Grand National is on, you know, they go around the jail. I saw people playing poker in full view of guards, using chips, and they say it's just for fun, but it's not. And obviously in a category D prison, for instance, I used to go out on community service, and then I had paid employment. So you get yourself to and from work, and people would collect betting slips, coupons, bring them back into prison, collect all the bets and take them back out. And mobile phones, you know, I know they're not loud, but so many people had them. So, you know, that's a casino in your pocket. So I think you only ever really find out when there's an issue is when there's debts involved, and people don't pay up. So they'll be asking to be secluded. or, you know, it's too late and violence happens because the debts haven't been paid up. So I think what needs to be acknowledged mainly is that it does go on. It really does go on. So if it's known that all staff are aware that it happens and people can approach them, then perhaps they might do that. But will they only approach them if they know there's going to be some support? If you're going to be, I don't know, what's the word, punished because you're gambling, are you going to go and seek support? So it's an extremely difficult one, I'm afraid.
Brilliant, Steve.
Thank you. That was
really. Sorry, Kim. That's really helpful. Thank you. And it's timely, I think, because our final speaker for this morning has joined us, Jamie Bennett from HMPPS. Many of you will know Jamie, but he's a former prison governor, among many other things. So his experience of your experience, Steve, of prison may be particularly of interest to him. But over to you, Jamie.
Yeah, thanks very much for the invite. So for a couple of years, I was on the Howard League Commission on Crime and Problem Gambling, and it was quite a pleasure to be asked to join, and it sort of made me reflect upon some of the experiences that I'd come across in prisons around gambling and, you know, perhaps problem gambling as well. It's interesting what Steve was saying about people gambling within prisons. I mean, playing cards can be purchased on the canteen. It's a sort of recreational activity, but it's often quite difficult to distinguish between when that is just a kind of game or a sport, same as dominoes or other activities, or whether it's when it's kind of going into gambling and all of the associated issues around debt, exploitation, etc. And it's certainly had some times in my career where I tackled that within prisons, because that had seemed to me was becoming excessive in certain places. And as Steve said, you walk around and you see groups of people playing cards, and it's not just a recreational activity. And I think in those circumstances, there were actually something about it undermining the very order of the prison. So, you know, I've sort of taken that on in a couple of places. But also when I was invited to join the commission, I was just struck by how little I actually knew about the extent of the issues around problem gambling in prisons, and started digging around, and I thought, well, you know, there's a prison service instruction for everything, isn't there? There's there's research and information available about every single issue, isn't there? There's like millions of criminologists researching all these subjects, and they have all the answers to these problems. So I thought, well, I'll go into the commission, I'll do 5 minutes research and I'll have all the answers. And of course, you start digging around and you realise how little work has been done in this area. And but this is sort of, but just some, you know, big numbers around, you know, this is big business. Gambling is, you know, the yield from gambling, I think that's how much money people lose, is around, you know, 15 billion pounds every year. It's huge business, and growing. The number of people who are identified as problem gamblers, you know, is estimated around 350,000. And there was a kind of book on crime and problem gambling, and, you know, it has a chapter on prisons, and it goes through some of the international research that there is, and there's really not a lot. There's a few small scale studies from Australia, Canada, America, which say a little bit about the extent of problem gambling within prison populations and the type of offending that it's linked to, but none of it can be described as comprehensive. The Forward Trust did a survey last year, 2020, a survey of 229 prisoners who used their service. I think it was across 14 prisons. And that was, I mean, again, it's not definitive because it's small scale and, you know, it's not a pristine piece of research, but it is quite interesting. So it said that 38% of people in prison of that sample said that they had gambled in the 12 months prior to coming into prison. So 40%, and 22% said they had gambled in prison during the last 12 months. So it does give you an idea of the extent of gambling within prison. And significant minorities within this survey did identify that it caused them problems, that gambling led to problems, a range of problems, health problems, relationship problems, financial problems, and problems in employment. So I think although small scale, limited, all of those kind of caveats that come with this piece of research, what it does do is highlight that problem gambling is an issue in prisons and for prison populations, and is something which people who work in prisons, I think, should take seriously and should start to think about, along with all of the other issues around reducing reoffending and resettlement. So what might a strategy look like? What might the kind of issues that we might think about as a prison service? And I think there are sort of 5 broad areas that we ought to think about. The first is trying to understand the extent of problem gambling. And we might just do that in fairly straightforward ways. For example, using OASIS. There is an element on OASIS about financial management. We might make sure that that specifically encompasses issues around gambling and problem gambling, so that we get a bit of information, you know, albeit imperfect, about the general prison population and the extent of issues that there might be around gambling or problem gambling. The second is about training and awareness raising. So if we want that to happen in OASIS assessment, then we ought to be training our offender managers. And if we want people like prison officers to understand some of the challenges around, you know, gaming, gambling, card playing, etc. in prisons and taking some action, then we ought to raise the awareness of that. You know, and like I said, you know, before I was invited onto the Commission for Crime and Problem Gambling, this was an issue I didn't know a lot about. So I think there are a lot of people who are in a similar situation who aren't really addressing their minds to this particular issue. And of course, there are lots of other issues in prisons that everyone needs to think about all of the time. But I think this is one that is worth doing some awareness raising about, to try and lift people's understanding, sense of the scale of the issue and what might be done about it. The third area is thinking about research. So, you know, research in prisons can be hugely valuable in informing our understanding and the different approaches that we take. So we might think about how we use our research strategy to sponsor and encourage research which helps to inform our understanding of gambling and problem gambling within the prison population and within prison itself. The fourth is thinking about internal conduct. So again, this is the issue that Steve raised about people gambling in prison. And we all, you know, I was kind of digging around and, you know, I couldn't actually find a specific prohibition on gambling in prison. I couldn't find anything which actually said, you know, I stand to be corrected, it might be hidden away somewhere in a document, but I couldn't actually find something which just said gambling is not allowed in prisons. So, you know, perhaps that's something that we ought to just make absolutely clear, and the reasons why it's prohibited in prison. And, you know, again, we need to sort of think about it in terms of the problems that are associated with it, debt, violence, organised crime within prisons. So there are a host of issues that come with it. And okay, drugs and mobile phones are always going to be much bigger issues in this regard, but this is going to be one of those elements. So feeding it into our understanding of the illicit economy and the range of potential security risks within prison is something we ought to think about. So that internal environment And then the fifth element is access to treatment. So in recent years, there has been a really significant expansion in NHS treatment for problem gambling, both within the statutory sector, within the NHS, but also there are a number of charitable organisations doing good work around gambling. And one of the positive things I experienced in prison was someone who did have a problem gambling set up a Gam-Anon, so a Gamblers Anonymous support group within a prison, try and help, because it was something he used, it was useful to him, but he also wanted to try and help other people. And so I think there are a range of services around there. So, you know, having better awareness and access into some of these services, in particular the developing NHS services, I think is an opportunity that people in prisons need to grasp, and in particular our health partners within prisons need to grasp, to help the people who need this support to be able to access it. So that's the sort of 5 elements that I think might usefully be developed in prisons. Understanding the extent of the problem, in particular through OASIS. Secondly, training and awareness raising for the people who work in prisons. Third, developing our research strategy. The fourth, thinking about the internal environment, the prohibition on gambling and the particular security risks around the illicit economy. And fifth, accessing treatment services, both NHS and voluntary. So they were just my reflections on prisons and problem gambling. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Brilliant, Jamie. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for joining us. I know you've got a very busy day today, but it was great to have you here for a few minutes to sort of share your experience and your insight, both as a former member of the Commission, along with Andrew and myself, but also with your experience as a prison governor and at HMPPS nationally. So thank you very much for joining us. So we're really now come to the end of our speakers for this morning, and it's time to hand over to you in terms of a Q&A. Now, I've just seen that a question's come in specifically for Jamie. Jamie, I don't know if you've got time to take a question before you head off. So Kim Martin, there's a question for you. So can I hand over to you to ask that one just before Jamie heads off?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jamie. I've made some notes. It's a really good starting point for us to start looking at how we can tackle this at HMP Wayland, where I work. But just a quick question. You're talking about the strategy that we could potentially put together, but are there any good practice templates that have already been developed that you could maybe point us in the direction of?
Hiya, Kim. Nice to put a face to the name. I mean, I think I know that locally you're really interested in developing some services around this. I mean, the reality is, as I said, when I've looked around nationally, there isn't anything. So, when I'm talking about developing a strategy, I think what I'm encouraging is that part of the sort of national resettlement, reducing reoffending strategy, this should be an element of it. And, I would like to see those kind of things develop. I think if there was, even a very straightforward strategy document, it might help local individual establishments to include this as part of their reducing reoffending strategies. But there's nothing sort of nationally around that I'm aware of around a sort of template for good practice. I think there are some individual establishments that have, developed good relationships, and there are some charities around, like the Forward Trust, for example, that are doing some innovative work. The NHS treatment centres are doing absolutely brilliant stuff, and I think if you can make contact with the national treatment centres, I think they can really be a valuable resource for prisons like Wayland, Kim, and yourself, who are looking to do something here and are just looking for a bit of help. And I think they are ideal people to make contact from. Within the prison service at the moment, I don't think the answers aren't there.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jamie. That's sort of disappointing, but also unsurprising and really helpful to know. So thank you for that. So we've had a couple of questions in via the Q&A. So we will go back to them now. The first couple were aimed, were sort of specifically about the London pilot and the work that's been done by London Probation and GamCare. So the first of those was from Sarah Clarksky. Sarah, I don't know if you can join us.
Hi, you're right. Just a really quick, really specific question to Dominique. It was just about the direct referral line for probation practitioners. Is that something specifically for the pilot, or is that something nationally that people can refer into?
At the moment, it's just for the pilot, so it's for London Probation and into our London treatment team. So we're going to test that out as part of the pilot. So not at the moment.
Thank you both. And then there was a second question around the pilot from Peter Kelly. Peter, I don't know if you can join us.
Morning, everybody. It wasn't really a question so much as a comment, and at risk of teaching my grandmother how to suck eggs, really. It's just, I feel that it's the tip of the iceberg, that the actual extent of gambling and the advent of new technology, it's just a massive problem in the UK. No thanks to Tony Blair for the Gambling Act legislation, which is under review at the minute. But I just think it's a huge problem, and it's hidden. But I'm interested in Dominique's organisation, and does she feel it's got legs? It's going to be sustainable in terms of funding. I mean, when you look at some of these gambling companies and the massive, it's disgusting. When you look at Bet365, Sarah Coates, and the salary and the money she's, in inverted commas, earning from her company, it's absolutely obscene. But I just wanted to get that off my chest, really.
Thanks, Peter. I can assure you we're not paid what the chief exec is paid from Bet365. It's a really interesting point that you make. So the funding for this criminal justice programme has come from the Gambling Commission through a Gambling Commission settlement. What happens is they're the regulator, and when they if they have a choice between fining an operator if they've not complied with the regulations, or they can the operator can come to a settlement with the Gambling Commission, and then the Gambling Commission use that to fund a lot of projects and programs around gambling. So there's and they have a strategy, so they use those funds to fund projects that contribute towards the Gambling Commission strategy, and that's where our funding for this programme has come from. But it's for 2 years, and my understanding is that usually this funding is for 2 years. So there's the kind of there are the links with sorry, all these messages coming in. So yeah, so it's for 2 years, and that's one of the reasons for us to pilot different approaches and try and test out so these kind of sort of proof of concept over those 2 years, because we think that that's the best use of a relatively short space of time, and the sustainability is a much bigger issue. And also, as you mentioned, obviously the Gambling Act review is ongoing, or is expected, I think, to publish fairly soon, and they're looking at the future of you know, funding, whether that should be via a levy from gambling companies on a percentage of their profits, and at the moment that's a voluntary levy, and that goes into sort of funding a lot of the existing treatment provision. So the National Gambling Treatment Service comes via GambleAware. So it's kind of like it's all a bit convoluted, but yes, there is a lot of money that comes from industry via sort of regulators and via other places, but the sustainability of that, and the fact that I think what everybody's been saying today is that we don't have enough provision is one of those key areas, and we don't think that this small program over 2 years is going to solve this by any means, but what we do hope is that we'll be able to find some things that work within the systems so that we can develop models that might be able to be taken forward.
Thanks, Dominique. If I could just follow up on that to you and maybe some of the other panelists. One of the point, Jamie's mentioned some of the exceptional NHS treatment services. It's obviously the work that you're doing. One of the issues that we've talked about on the Commission is the extent to which we should be developing services to support people who have got addictions to gambling within the justice system, as opposed to finding ways to refer people out of the system into mainstream services. I wonder if you had a view from your experience of whether or not we should be developing a parallel justice specific gambling service, or whether we should be trying to get people into mainstream services wherever possible.
Sorry, is that for me?
For you first, maybe, if you don't mind.
Okay. I think when I was saying about this sort of, how widely different parts of the criminal justice system are, I think that what you're looking at in terms of prisons is going to be very different in what you're going to look at in people in the community, because I think that prisons have so many competing priorities, and you have a lot of services working in prisons, that you might have to have something that's much more streamlined within the system, either within a provider within the prison, or via the sort of the prison service and the prison officers themselves. I think it's really looking at what's going to work, rather than trying to. I do think that it needs to be tailored to the needs of both the individuals, but also it needs to be tailored to that system, because if we're working against the prison system, it just won't work. And if it's not, it's about embedding that, as Jamie was saying, that there are people are, and Steve was saying, you're asked about drug and alcohol and mental health, and it's trying to get gambling in there and embedded in it. And I think it worked different. That's a bit of a ramble, but I think it sounds a bit of a fudge, but I think you have to be so context specific, and it's very complex in prison in terms of what's also going on in the prison itself. So there's a lot of layers in that. I think when you're looking at people within the community, there might well be, I think you want to have services that are tailored to those people's needs, but whether that can be through mainstream services or whether that needs to sit within probation and rehabilitation services themselves, I'm not sure.
Thank you. Did any of the other panelists have a view on that sort of question of the balance between specialist and mainstream services?
Yeah, so that was, I mean, it was interesting. I think, and essentially I agree with Dominique that, I mean, first of all, I think it's really important to understand people in the criminal justice system often have complex and multiple needs. So you can't just filter out and sort of say, well, everything else in this person's life is absolutely fine. It's just the problem gambling. So let's just sort out the problem gambling, and then everything's great. And it's just not often like that. There's often also issues around sort of trauma, substance misuse, mental health, and housing, employment, a whole host of issues which need to be kind of worked on collectively. And I think the other issue is that the people generally the people who come into the criminal justice system have committed some serious harm. And so, I think sometimes there is an argument that because there's some sort of background reason that people have committed an offence, it should somehow therefore be excused, and just their sort of problem should be dealt with. But that actually, when people have committed harm and present a significant risk to society, then it's quite right that society responds to that and is protected from that. So that means that inevitably there are significant numbers of people who are in prison and are separated from society. Now, whilst they're there, we should make sure that they have access to the equivalent services, and organisations like Howard League campaign for, since they were created for this kind of stuff, to have equal access to things like health. And I do wonder whether, whether there isn't always in equivalence, and this is one of the problems of sort of prison health, is trying to make sure that there is a broad equivalence between what's available in the community and what's available in prisons. But at the moment, you know, certainly in terms of problem gambling services, you know, I'm not aware of what the referral rate is from prisons and how that compares to the general population. My suspicion is that it's very low. So I think that, you know, potentially there's not an equivalence being provided. I don't, you know, like I said, I don't have evidence for that. But that is my suspicion. And so I think that part of the kind of building awareness, building understanding, is also about driving forward, so to try and help people who are in prison to access the health services they need, whether that's mental health, whether it's drug treatment, whether it's for problem gambling.
Thanks, Jamie. Did any of the other panelists have want to contribute on this question? Andrew.
Sorry, Teams didn't want me to unmute there. I think this is really interesting, and actually the prisons part of the system is the part of the system that the Commission has looked least at, and I think that we will be considering that in our next year of work, not least because some of the issues that Steve mentioned earlier around gambling in prison were again a recurring theme in the lived experience research that we're publishing next. I think a lot of what we have focused on so far has been further upstream in terms of the courts, so the sentencing research I mentioned, and thinking about probation and what's going on in the community, partly because I think a lot of where we have seen pockets of good practice, I mentioned work with Cheshire Police, for example, it is further upstream, and also because I think there is, as I mentioned in the talk, my talk, there is real potential for looking at the new probation model and looking at what funds police and crime commissioners have to fund stuff in the community, where it isn't replicating what's already there in the community, but is potentially funneling some criminal justice funding towards joining together practitioners who are working in criminal justice with treatment services in the community, if that makes sense. But with prisons, there may have to be some replication, and that's an interesting question that we should be looking at.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think we had a question in the chat from Amalara Jonah. Is that right?
It just related to, I think I'd seen some booklets a few years ago, and I think they were developed by GamCare, and they were targeted at prisoners really with habits in gambling and things like that. They're very old, and they used to be printed out by Coldingley, I think, but they're very difficult to get hold of. But we used to have stacks of them when I worked at Scrubs. So I just wondered if they still had that sort of self-help resource as a starting point and that sort of stuff, really.
Thanks. Yes, we have it's an in-cell workbook that was developed as part of the Hertfordshire pilot programme, and so yeah, we still have, I think, those available. So I can get in we can get in contact with you and see what it is you need.
Yeah.
Problem.
And I just thought that might be useful for other people just to know about as well. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. When I was talking about the resources, when Vicky and I are going to be working together to look at what resources are sort of, helpful around, because obviously it's different for probation, I think, than it is when these were designed specifically for people to work through, like I say, in cell workbook, which is perhaps not. But yeah, we'll follow that up with you. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Put my email in the conversation a few times as the programme manager for the criminal justice work at GamCare. So if anyone's interested in receiving any of the books we currently have, please feel free to get in contact with myself and I'll link you up. And if I could just add to a point that I think Steve asked in the comments about us working alongside lived experience. These workbooks that were developed in consultation with people with lived experience, and they're definitely a piece of work that we're wanting to broaden out to get to more areas within criminal justice. So we're really keen to hear from anybody's views about if they work well, what else we could be doing, and collaborate with you all on them.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Christopher. There's a couple of questions in the chat that one we just had and one or two others about there are pockets of good practice out there, and we do hear about good things that are going on, but other people working in the system may not be aware of them or know kind of what there is out there that's available. And I was wondering if there's more that we could do other than on top of today's event, obviously, to spread and share good practice. George, I don't know if you've got a view on that, or possibly in terms of your role, in terms of how we can make sure that good practice is collated and shared in a systematic way, and people who are working on this, day to day, can actually access that material.
Yes, I was just typing something in the chat actually. The working group that we've sort of ad hoc put together in response to the commission. Our kind of main achievement so far, I think, has been to get the 7-minute briefing into production and publication, and within that, the assessment question. I think the 7-minute briefing itself and events like this are raising awareness, and that assessment question, I think, is the kind of first step. But I was making a note of what are the other things that people need in their hands as practitioners, and I think the working group will want to look into this. The advantage of the working group is it's plugged into the HMPPS sort of internal comms and effective practice network, which is really good, both on the prison and probation side. I think I don't know how many people are in this event from the voluntary sector who are working with offenders, but I think that's another group that we need to be plugging into through our networks there. And then to be able to to create those bits and pieces of guidance that people need. So we're really happy to do that. And one of the questions I was just about to put in the chat is if anybody has any other suggestions of what could be usefully provided, put onto the intranet, circulated through the voluntary sector networks, let us know, and we can look at that. And then I think the other thing is the partnership arrangements, not just with GamCare, but as Jamie said about the other services such as health. Police and Crime Commission has been mentioned as quite a powerful group involved in this that we can also get onto. The other thing I have picked up from the conversation that I have had previously with Andrew, but also from this, is having a look at POCA again, and what we might need to do. That's a bit more kind of background stuff, and finding out whether we've got policy leads on our side for that. So I think one of the takeaways for me is our working group and what that needs to be doing, and I'm really interested to hear kind of items for the agenda from people on this call.
Thanks, George. Did anyone else have anything they wanted to add on that one in terms of sort of disseminating good practice? No. Okay. In that case, I think that we've got a question from Peter Kelly about ability to pay. Is that right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I was late coming to the meeting this morning, and I missed the start of Steve's presentation. And really, it's a question for Steve, and whether I didn't pick up who he gambled with and how he gambled. And I'd be interested to see if this came into play with his own experience, whether he was ever asked to provide proof of legitimate earnings in order to continue his gambling. I'd just be interested in that.
No, is the answer. I don't know if you caught it, but one of the operators was fined over £1 million for their failings. I used 7 operators, none of which ever asked for any source of income, any affordability checks. The only thing they really got involved with me was when I hadn't had a bed for a few days, and then they would drop £500 into my account to get me to, back gambling again, and it worked. And the correlation between getting free bets, starting again, and then stealing funds because I needed to continue, there's such a link to that. So it's something, affordability checks need to be brought in. I honestly believe that you could set a limit now for most people when they set up a new account, pick a limit and stick to it. If you then need to change it at a period of time afterwards, then that's when the operators can do a check to see if you can afford it. So yeah, I keep going back to it, and I always will. You know, I took my responsibility far too late, but I took it, and I took it seriously, and I suffered the consequences. The operators need to do the same better than they do now.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Steve. So I think we've got a further question from Sarah Clarksky. I think it's next on our list. Sarah, are you still there?
Yeah, I'm still here. It was just thinking about what Andrew was saying about the new probation model and under the TOM and where the commissioned rehabilitative services fit into that. And I thought that I'd read that the gambling support and interventions around gambling potentially fell under the commission under the finance benefit and debt pathway, and if that was included within the bids that were going on for the next round, or is that something that I've completely misunderstood, and does it more sit within each of the RPD sort of ROIF funds, the innovative funds? So I guess my question is it something that's directly across the board under the bids for commissioned rehabilitative services, or is it something more locally that needs to be commissioned, if that makes sense?
Does, thank you. I'm not sure if anyone on the call is going to be able to answer that. George or Heather, possibly. If not, we may have to get back to you. George, I don't know if you've got a view.
No, I mean, I think let's take that away as a question to think about. There's loads coming up that we obviously need to think about further.
Yeah, and I think as we kind of assess the event and look at what colleagues in London are doing with their project, I guess that's kind of where we get our evaluation and evidence in terms of any recommendations or any commissions we take in for new work. So there's not a straightforward answer to that, Sarah, but can you keep it for when I come back in a couple of weeks, and we'll have a chat to Patrick and Ian potentially about that. Thank you.
No worries.
And Vicky, one of our other panelists, has got her hand up.
Oh, no, I was just about to say that this pilot in London came out from the Regional Outcome and Innovation Fund, but I am not sure. This is not something I can respond to about a national, how it's going to go nationally or not as we speak. So that's all.
Brilliant, thank you. So I think that, like a few things that have been raised today, it's something we'll have to come back to, and it's showing that there are still some gaps in terms of what we know about what the next steps might be. Looking at questions coming in the chat, and do keep them coming. We've still got a little bit of time left, and we've still got probably space for a couple more questions. So if there are more, then do add them into chat. And probably I should have said this ages ago, but I'll say it now, better late than never. If you could say who you are and where you work when you ask a question, if possible, that would be really helpful, because we've got people here from the statutory and voluntary sectors. That would be helpful. We've got a question about peer mentoring from Becky Baumer, which I guess could be for the London pilot specifically, but also possibly from a national perspective. Becky.
Hiya. I work in the probation service as a probation practitioner, and we've used peer mentors and other avenues. It's been really positive. I think sometimes they get a much better response, or people listening to them, because they have that lived experience. And I was wondering, would we be looking to have a bit more of an intervention around gambling, but using peer mentors in that same format to give that lived experience and that encouragement for people to see that there is a way forward?
I can speak broadly on a GamCare's perspective, that within our treatment model, the majority of our work is based around one-to-one support or group work, but when people near the end of their direct treatment, we do link them up with our own support groups, and we do have a link with PeerAid, where we're developing mentoring and peer support programs. It's an area of interest that I'm particularly looking at within our criminal justice program, to see how we can do that better to support cohorts of people who are also going through criminal justice. So it's definitely a really good question that you're raising, Becky, and something that we're wanting to explore and understand more of, how we can mirror our current treatment processes and try and adapt them to really fit to support people maybe in a slightly different circumstance.
Thanks, Christopher. Does anyone else from the panel have a view on kind of peer mentoring? Steve, I don't know if, I think that's something that that your charity are involved with now, does, so perhaps you might have a view.
Yeah, I mean, one of our aims, we're in our pilot yet. The response we've had from the 70+ people that have gone through the programme has been fantastic. And it's all about this support after treatment, after the care. So many people fall down when they receive great treatment, but then go out into life again. And you know, it's just, it can be so many different things. Trying to get car insurance for the first time after my conviction. I paid £270 before I went to jail. And the cheapest quote I got was £1,200 because I took conviction. Trying to fill the gaps in the CV. How do I do it? How do I explain it? So this after support, led by lived experience, it is something I really think should be at the core of some of this. So I'd be so happy to speak with Christopher and Dominique, because there's people coming through the criminal justice system that would really benefit from support. So if it's out there, please, let's work together to ensure the people that need it get it. I put in chat that stopping gambling, it wasn't easy, but with the right support you can do it. But there's so many times where I felt so down, just going for an interview for a job, which I was so overqualified for, but I just fell apart in the interview because I couldn't explain properly what had happened to me. It's something obviously I'm really passionate about. I really believe, you know, our foundation has picked up that this is an area where work needs to be done. So yeah, I'd love to get it fitted into a clear pathway through the treatment providers, so that when treatment ends, you know, it's not just a fall off and there's no support.
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, and we're talking to Mark and Sharon in your organisation, I think, precisely on that because it's again, it's sort of it's so much less well established than sort of drug and alcohol, and I think that kind of aftercare is only just emerging really, and I know that your organisation is at the forefront of that.
Is anyone else from the panel have anything to say on peer mentoring or the role that peer mentors can play? No? Okay, thanks very much, Becky. That was a really interesting question. We've got a question from Katie Faulkner about, I think, cryptocurrency.
Hi, I'm Katie Faulkner. I work at Vista Probation Office as a probation practitioner. I'm just finding that more and more of my service users are mentioning crypto, particularly younger service users. And I just put it out there for some thoughts, really, and whether that's recognised as sort of a form of gambling. And yeah.
I can probably comment on that one. Hi, my name's Julia, Head of Development at GamCare. I've just put a note in the chat about that. So we run a separate programme in GamCare, which is Gambling and Financial Harm. We're in our kind of second year on that, similar to this sort of criminal justice development thought leadership. And we've explored various things around financial harm, debt, the credit card ban, loopholes around that, etc., etc. But the last workshop we ran on that was specifically about volatile trading and the harms of kind of day trading and the links to gambling. So if you're interested, I've put Raminta's email address in the chat, who heads up that project. And the workshop was attended by people with lived experience of day trading, their views on how that links to gambling behaviour, therapists from the Castle Craig Clinic who's dealing with people around crypto addiction, trading platforms, financial sector. So there was a lot of different people there. There's a couple of hours workshop, but there is a video and there's people with lived experience as well, as I say. So you can have a chat with Raminta around that, but the video, I think, sets out, is it similar to gambling or not? And I think those people with lived experience will say yes if it's done in a certain way, in this kind of very compulsive, regularly checking sort of day trading rather than longer term investing. So it would be worth getting in touch with Raminta if you wanted to know a bit more around that. It's not absolutely clear cut, but there's some really good views in that workshop that you may find useful. And it may be quite useful to link up to that project more generally, because it's not just crypto, there's various elements of financial harm that we look at, including debt, kind of financial manipulation, etc., kind of bumps into domestic abuse. All these different things sort of bump into each other. So if you're interested in that particular area and the link to the finance debt, criminal justice work, it might be a useful place. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And there are some areas that I feel like I just don't know nearly enough about, and cryptocurrency is definitely one of them. So it's a reminder that I should probably get up to speed. George, I think you sort of had a general sort of question or point about young people and young adults.
Yeah. So I specifically asked about young people and young adults, and I know that there are things going on where gaming, is linking into the gambling industry in terms of some of the things that young people doing in gaming kind of have a pattern of transactions which are very similar to the gambling industry. So it's like a sort of preparation for turning 18 and being able to gamble, which I think is very sinister. And so we might have a whole cohort who are kind of trained up in kind of gambling and using gambling in a different way to that kind of going into the bookmakers time. So I don't think we know much about that, and thanks Julia for coming back on the young adult stuff. But I'm sorry, Dominic, but I'm interested in whether there are cohorts within the cohort of problem gamblers that we need to think about. We're just kind of scratching the surface of our sophistication of the understanding of this, and I think whenever we've looked at a group of offenders, in depth in the past, you'd actually find that there are quite distinct groups within them, either by age or ethnicity or background or whatever. or what the drivers are for their offending. And I'm just interested in opening up that question about where are the cohorts within and the obvious one is around youth and young adults who might not be able to be reached in the same way as well. Practice might be, effective practice might look different for those groups as well.
Thanks, George. I think it's a really interesting, the subsets within the groups, I think, is always a really interesting and important issue. Andrew, I think maybe you wanted to come in on this one.
Yeah, I'm sure that people from the gambling harms organisations will want to say something about that, George, and the issue of gaming and loot boxes and the debate around whether that is gambling. The commission, I just wanted to get in quickly that the Commission has took the view that we would just focus on adults in our initial tranche of work. We are interested in looking at issues around children and young adults. It's something that we may well try and do some work on in the future, but just in case people are wondering why we haven't mentioned youth justice, that's why we decided to focus in the first instance on adults, but we're very aware that the issues will be different for younger people, and not least on this question of the patterns of gambling and what they're doing. But I'm sure other people will have things to say about that in response to your question.
Thanks, Andrew. I don't know if colleagues from GamCare have got a particular view on kind of the separate needs of young people and how that may differ from the adult population.
I think that was what I think George put it better, saying that practice would look quite different working with young people. I was just tripping over my words, I think.
But just to add, I've been having conversations with our young people's programme about how we can link up some of our thinking, and I know that they're doing some work at the moment, which is really interesting, around how young people don't associate that they are gambling, but are quite happy to take risks. And there's a lot around looking at risks and risky behaviour and how that can lead into transferable of seeing loot boxes not as a risk, but as something that will pay off because they're confident around that. And there's lots of questions that they're posing, which I think would be really interesting for us to bring back potentially to you, George, and within our working group in the first instance, to see where we could then place it to learn more in this context.
Thanks, Christopher. Lara, you've got your hand up. Did you have something to add on this, or a separate question indeed?
It sort of leads in from, it kind of was triggered by the conversations we've had about young people and gaming. I lead on a programme called BBR, which is a programme for domestic abuse perpetrators. And we kind of did a bit of a review with some of our service users around what needed to be changed within the programme. And some of the feedback we had was around gambling. I don't know if anybody had any thoughts about links between gambling and domestic abuse, but they said, look, you've missed a trick here. You really need to be thinking about this within the programme. Any thoughts?
Yes, thank you. Certainly, in terms of the Commission evidence that we've taken, domestic abuse and the links to problem gambling have come up on multiple occasions and are clearly a pretty significant issue. I don't know if any of the panelists want to add anything to that.
We in GamCare have a programme which is a women's programme, which is looking at gender differences connected to gambling harm. That I've done a lot of work looking at the subject of domestic violence and the correlation. One of the things that we've also seen that we haven't spoke about today is our programme of clinical treatment for people who are seen as affected others. So we see a large cohort of people who come into our treatment processes as an affected other to somebody's gambling, who will then often report their own experience of domestic violence and domestic abuse. So we do have fairly significant data developing within GamCare and within our treatment processes that there is a correlation that needs to be looked at, and have been linking quite closely with numerous domestic violence services within the women's programme to try and tackle and look at it further. So again, separate from today, if that's a conversation of work that you're looking at, I'd be really keen to catch up with you, and I could facilitate including our women's programme to be part of that discussion.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much, everyone. I think unless I've missed any questions that, as we've gone through, that's the sort of main ones that were submitted through the Q&A have now been covered, and we are sort of 5 minutes from the end of our allotted time. In a second, I'm just going to ask if any of the panelists have got any sort of very brief final points that they want to make, but to give them a second, and don't all feel the need, don't worry, but just if there is anything that you haven't had a chance to respond to or haven't had a chance to say that we haven't got to yet, and we'll give you a few seconds to do that in a minute. Before I do, I wanted to say thank you to all the audience for your questions, for your contributions, for your ideas. I think one of the things that's been great that I've seen in the chat is one of the things you worry about with online events is you'll miss out on those networking opportunities, there's a chance to meet people. And what I've enjoyed seeing in the chat is people sharing email addresses, passing on things people they should get in contact with, and that broader function around learning from each other, and ensuring that some of the stuff we've been talking about today will be shared more broadly, discussed further, and there'll be more thinking done about how it can be built into the system. So thank you for your questions, but thank you also for taking part in the event and discussing with each other what's going on, which is maybe as important, if not more important, than what we've been talking about on the panel. So thank you to you. Thank you to all of our speakers, who I think have been fantastic, both in terms of their presentations and in terms of responding to questions. Do any of you have any sort of last points that you want to make? And I will try and zip through you in order in terms of the order that you spoke. So, and George, I don't know if you've got anything that you wanted to add finally.
Yeah, so I think what this has demonstrated is that the working group that we've got has got quite a lot to consider. I'm very keen, and I noticed there are quite a few people very engaged in the conversation. We'd be delighted to hear from you as part of the working group. So I've just dropped my email into the chat. If people want to get hold of me directly, I'll be delighted.
Thanks, George. Andrew, anything you wanted to add?
Just to say thank you to everybody, and really this is just a great example of what we were looking to do with the Commission in terms of getting people having these kinds of conversations, and to get the buy-in from George and colleagues in the MOJ and HMPPS has been really great to see. And also thanks to Steve for coming in at fairly short notice to give a really powerful testimony that just brought everything to life.
Thanks, Andrew, and yes, thanks very much, Steve. I think you've seen in the comments the appreciation for your presentation. Was there anything you wanted to add at the end of the event in terms of your own perspectives?
Yeah, just a thank you for the opportunity. It is quite difficult to sort of go over your failings, but also it shows the importance of lived experience in this. So I would say to everybody, please always take that into consideration when you move forward, is just get that perspective, because it can be quite vital at times. So thank you to everyone.
Well, no, thank you very much to you for joining us. It's been, and I think you're absolutely right about the value of lived experience, the difference it can make in terms of understanding an issue and in terms of service design. Heather, is there anything you wanted to add?
Just to say thank you, really, and I think it's just really enlightening that people are still learning. You know, I spoke about 1992 and betting slips, and even learning about the more modern ways of how people do gamble. And part of practitioner best practice is to keep up to date with the most recent developments. So that's lots of information, more than welcome to take forward to develop the materials that we'll be providing. So thank you very much, and in particular, Steve. I work on quite a few different working groups, and the lived experience part is very active in several arenas at the moment. So thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Heather. Vicky.
Thank you from me as well. Thank you for having us today to speak about the pilot we're about to launch in London. And yeah, I just would like to see the conversation going. See gambling as the need that it is, not purely FBD or purely that's finance benefit and debt, or purely an issue of addiction, but as a factor that can overlap many different issues that people face within the criminal justice system. And yeah, inform best practice, keep sharing ideas, keep sharing what's going on. That's all from me. Thank you very much for today.
Thanks, Vicky. And last of all, Dominique.
Just to say that we know we have a huge amount of work to do, but it's just great to be in a room with so many people. There's so much going on. There's so much drive, energy, enthusiasm, and commitment to addressing the issue in all its facets. So it's really encouraging. It's been great. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you to your GamCare colleagues who have also joined us at various points through the panel for their additional experience and expertise. That's been really helpful. It's now 12 o'clock, so there's the time to wrap up this event. It's just been really, having spent a couple of years getting to know a bit more about this issue, it's been really inspiring and interesting to hear so many different people talking about it from different perspectives, and I think we've all learned a lot. So thank you very much for your time, and hope to see you at one of these events again in the future. Thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.